Yesterday, and you may have seen this, Max Olson, we discussed this with him as well. There was a meeting. The California system is talking and discussing UCLA's move to the Big Ten. George Kliavkoff had sent a letter. He also was in a part of the meeting. Let me go. I know there's 4 different quotes here, or 4 chunks here. Let's do the top one and then discuss it each one at a time. UCLA currently spends approximately $8.1 million per year on travel for its teams to compete in the Pac-12. UCLA will incur a 100% increase in its team travel cost if it flies commercial to the Big Ten, 160% increase if it charters half the time, another $13 million a year, and a 290% increase if they charter every flight, about $23 million per year. His argument here, which is one of the ones you've heard, is that by being a part of the Big Ten, some of the money or a chunk of the money they're going to get more in television is going to be basically a trade-off because of the travel cost to go play teams from the Big Ten.
Well, there's 2 things about this. One, clearly UCLA feels and believes on their math that even if they chartered 100% of the time and spent $23 million a year on that would be offset by the near $50 million a year they're going to make more in the league. 2, and somewhat more importantly, what's going to happen after he says, okay, not this? They're still spending money on travel wherever they go. He also wanted to partner with the ACC potentially. Like all these things.
On a lot of these we're about to talk about.
What is it? I mean, why does it make sense that that's the argument?
It's not all 12 games are going to be at Rutgers, Maryland, or Nebraska and Wisconsin. So that was one of the quotes.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know how he came up with that. I would like to see how they determined what their schedule is going to look like and how they know that they're going to be traveling to all these different places, because they pretty much blindly had to just say, like, let's assume they're going to Columbus, dart. Let's just assume they're going to Illinois, dart. What did that all cost? Like, that's the only thing they could do. They don't have a schedule in front of them, so how do they know what the heck it's going to be? So that's for one. Like, that's a lot of numbers that they were able to accumulate based on no information, really, other than just guessing. I still don't buy how that all adds up. The way they say it adds up. And I think you kind of killed it there, Paul, of this is the same conference that was talking about an alliance with a conference on the other side of the country, just as far, if not farther away in some cases.
And the Big Ten.
And the Big Ten. And that was all happy, joy when the Pac-12 was still going to be the Pac-12 and have to travel. But I guess the argument would be, well, that was only going to be selective non-conference games and whatnot. Well, it's not going to be that much more than it's going to be here in this situation. You're not going to travel 10 times across the country now that you're in the Big Ten. You're still going to have your handful of games. So you're going to have your handful of games that you go away. You'll have some non-conference. You try to keep those closer to home most likely. Mm-hmm. And then you have your handful that's like Michigan and Northwestern and whatever. How is that any different than if you were going to be going to Clemson or Wake Forest or Miami or whoever in your ACC challenge? So that doesn't make any sense when you were sitting there proudly raising the flag for the alliance 2 years ago, and now you're talking about travel issues and travel costs. Like, where did that come from? Because that wasn't an issue 2 years ago.
Five road games most years, because they're going to
conference road games.
Everybody's going to try to get 7 home games. I'm just saying 5 road games in general. Okay. So you're going to have 5 road games in general, maybe 6 on a year where it swings around and hits you in the face. So of those 6 road games, only potentially 2 of them could be so far away that it's going to be a pain in the neck, right?
If they play 9, and I don't know how many they're going to, if they play 9 conference games, and I'm using that number, it could be 8, maybe it's going to be 10, but let's say 9. You're talking about 4 or 5 games on the road. 4 or 5 games. If you would have had the alliance, you most likely were going to play a couple of those games, one in the Big Ten, somewhere in the Big Ten, somewhere in the ACC, and then vice versa. So, yeah, no, in the other sports, the non-football sports, it's not like they're going to go to Rutgers on Tuesday, fly back to California, and then head back to Maryland on Friday. They'll probably turn those in like they've done before. Stanford's done this, to elongated road trips.
Everybody does this in the non-revenue sports anyway. Look, Faith Lynch was in here yesterday, and they've got a trip that's
volleyball player at Baylor.
That is, I believe it's West Virginia and Iowa State in a week, or Iowa State and West Virginia. So they don't have to do that. So they're not bouncing back and forth, and that's more economical. And again, like you're not going to do it that much, so I don't. And you're also going to do it.
He's trying to save his conference.
That's one school. You're about to do it for 12.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. No. Exactly. Now the next quote: published media research by the National Institutes of Health, studies conducted by the NCAA, and discussions with our own student athlete leaders, show the move will have negative impact on student athletes' mental health and take away from their academic pursuits. Now he's trying to tug at those emotional strings. I think student athletes have, I know that now with the NIL and the perks and stuff that they get and the swag and all that, I don't know how they do it sometimes. Even with all of what they get now, the bells and whistles, it's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy if you're just a regular student who's trying to, have a degree in education. But he's trying to get a little bit maybe in the politics right here.
Well, also.
And he's not done with that either.
Okay, so when the UCLA basketball team was on the road for a month in
Indianapolis?
Well, I mean, the basketball teams are on the road for a month if they're good, regardless of whether it was in Indianapolis or not. They're home for 2 days and then they leave. So if you're in the Final Four, so when the UCLA was in the Final Four, the hundreds of millions of times they've been there before. I'd say hundreds of millions, but the tons of times they've been there before. Was it a big deal to them then? Like, it's interesting that this is the time you say, well, I'm really concerned about academic performance, but there's many other times where you have not cared when they're gone. And basketball is the example I'll give is if UCLA has a Final Four basketball team, they're going to be on campus of the 30-day month, about 4 of those days, really, generally on campus, not having to worry about anything else.
And Bob Kramer on the chat room, and Craig, you follow up. Bob Kramer, that's a question each student athlete needs to ask
How does
themselves.
he know? He can't answer that for anybody and say that they're just automatically going to have more mental health issues. That's BS reasoning on his part. And look, I by no means dismiss the mental health aspect in our world today and how much it's focused upon and how much more it's been, pushed to the forefront. But I do think it's fair to say that in some cases, and we can't sit there and necessarily pinpoint, it's being used as an excuse. And I think right here, it's being used as an excuse to not allow UCLA to go to the Big Ten. I'm more so than actually real concern for the student athletes. And maybe that's unfair to George Kliavkoff. Maybe he really does feel that way. But in this setting and for these reasons that we're talking about, I don't buy that. I don't buy that at all. The mental health wasn't a question when you were talking about, again, pairing up with the ACC and the Big Ten 2 years ago. Not that different from what we're talking about right now. Granted, it's one school, because we're not talking about USC in this at all. It's one school, and it's just one other conference that they're going to. But again, it's not going to be all that different. So I'm thinking that this is one of those times where somebody's using mental health as an excuse to play into their favor. And I hate that because it really devalues the term, and it makes people question it when they hear that term. And that sucks. That really sucks.
All right, one more or so from Kliavkoff. And again, you have your own opinion on these, and some of you in the chat room do, and that's great. It would be a burden for family and alumni to face cross-country trips to see UCLA's teams play.
Well, tell them to go home.
No, it won't.
Tell them to, no, it won't. Tell them to go at home first, too. Apparently, if attendance at the cross-country away games is a big deal, maybe they should fight the traffic in L.A. and go to a home game, too.
Yeah.
You might be able to fly to Penn State.
I mean,
yeah, they're not going either way. And also, so much of what families are able to do now is a result of the NIL era, and they're getting plane tickets and they're getting those kinds of accommodations in so many ways. So I think it's actually easier, and former parents of players or current players' parents can say otherwise, but I do believe there's a lot more freedom in terms of the travel and how that's doled out and how families are able to come to away games. So I'm not buying that reason either. And like you said, even before getting into the fact that that's kind of BS, is the fact that, they don't show up at home games either. So, what's the deal there? Yeah.
And then one more. This is, again, George Kliavkoff in his letter, and also the meeting with the Pac-12 or with California regions. Added travel runs contrary to the UC system's climate goals and works against UCLA's commitment to climate neutrality by 2025.
Okay, let me...
and go ahead.
Let me throw something out there about this and climate neutrality. While that's a noble goal and I love planet Earth, the things that we do in America and I just look into this on your own. But to make things organic is a very wide government statute if you was having an organic steak. And carbon offsets are usually what people use to talk about carbon neutrality, and carbon offsets are the biggest load of BS in the world. It's where essentially they say, okay, well, we're going to buy this much land and plant this many trees and do this thing to offset the carbon, and that's just nothing. It's not worth the paper it's printed on. So look, while that's just such a, let me try to get these California liberals to be like, oh my God, UCLA is going to, hurt the environment by going, come on.
Okay, so those are comments from George Kliavkoff from in the letter to various people around the Pac-12 and the California system.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun to see his comments, I suppose, although I think you can shoot holes through a lot of them right away because of the whole alliance thing. I don't think that maybe he does. Maybe he's just hoping people don't remember that when they're looking at all these points about cross-country travel and all that, because, man, that was sure being an idea that was celebrated in the time, wasn't it? And now here we are, and all of a sudden travel's bad. But, yeah, I can't get past that point, for one. But I know he's got to do what he's got to do. I guess the question is not so much – I mean, Kliavkoff really doesn't matter in this in the long run. Like, it's not his decision to make. It's a matter of what does the UC system want to do? Is this something – like, we know they can – in theory, stop this. Like, they can, in theory, stop this. It's a matter of if it's worth it. And I don't think it's worth it. I think it's silly, and I think that it's very, very much a political thing now. And I get why Kliavkoff's, trying to pull all the strings and moves that he can to prevent UCLA from going, to try and save some little bit of face. And I'm not even talking about the question of, like, okay, let's say they did stay. What would that even look like, and how stressful and just weird would that be? I'm not even talking about that. I just think in general it's just kind of silly at this point and a little desperate. I take that back. It's a lot desperate. And I don't know how great this comes across the more it drags out. And, yeah, it could in theory happen, but I just don't know that that's worth it across the board.
The Cal University system regions have met several times about the move, including Thursday. They have not said whether they can or will cancel UCLA's move, but several regions in California, of course, Governor Gavin Newsom, have questioned their decision. Well, when Texas decided to leave for the SEC, schools tried to go down to Austin and, let vent. Didn't do any good.
Okay.
None of them. Baylor tried, Texas Tech tried, TCU tried. They were all down in Austin, and I'm not saying they didn't want to fight for their schools. They should. But it was not going to change anyone's mind.
All right, so when A&M left, the governor of Texas was an Aggie.
Yes, Rick Perry.
When Texas left, the governor of Texas is the Longhorn, which doesn't help. Not only that, okay, let's go to California and Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom, only thing he cares about is how much money you can give him so he can run for president or continue to run for governor and run for president in 2024. That's all he cares about. So that means UCLA people and USC people and all these people whose money is green who really don't care what conference the football team's in. All he cares, so when he says, yeah, I didn't know about that, that's just him making sure that when he walks into a donor's house that does all of a sudden care about these things, he says, well, I did what I could. That's it. That's all that is. So then he says, I did what I could. You spelled the name Newsom on the check.
Mr. Hairgel is